And we are back with Ryan. He is, his expertise are so voluminous. And I loved our last segment's discussion on intellectual property law and how to protect the infringements or potential infringements for businesses. Now, especially as we're closing up 2024, we have 2025 coming up, and we're going to see a lot of changes in laws and stuff, and navigating employment law. And I understand your firm is not a lawyer, and that's why you have a great team. So you do have those corporate attorneys on deck if they need to come to bat. What are some of the most common employment law issues that businesses are facing today?
That's a great question. I think there's maybe a tier of them, and I'll hit maybe just a couple for the sake of timeliness on the show. But I would say probably number one is just the wage and hour compliance, just making sure people are matching and being paid the appropriate wages and in the appropriate way, because sometimes there's a lot of exemptions or things that you cannot exempt and must offer to everyone. And then, of course, you have overtime compliances, who gets overtime, who doesn't qualify for overtime, how do you pay out overtime? So those are some big ones. And then employee classification just by itself is another one. We have huge educational sessions with a lot of our clients about just what is the difference between an employee and a contractor, or a part-time employee and a full-time employee, and then what benefits are they allowed to have or must they have, depending on those two. So that's another big one. And then, of course, I think there's some other issues that go along with more having a good SOP, like your harassments and your confidentiality and things like that. But definitely wage and hour compliance, all the payroll type stuff. Do tips get taxed or not taxed? How do they get reported? How do you handle cash? And then the full-time, part-time versus, is this person even an employee or are they a contractor?
Well, okay, let's just go into a little bit. And I know you're like, oh, well, this may be somewhat basic, but for those of us that really would like to know, and I dealt with this actually when the labor laws changed. It used to be that if somebody was salaried, it was determined that they didn't have overtime, and it was only for hourly wage, hourly paid employees. That actually is no longer the fact. It's not the norm. I don't think it's been the norm probably for 6, 7 years. Um, how do you distinguish between having to pay? So let's say you have, I'll just use my firm. I have a paralegal. She's a full-time salaried paralegal. She's earning, say, $45,000 a year, and she's working sometimes 60 hours a week. Would I be required to pay her overtime?
Gotcha. So in that situation, they're just bumping up the law and they just passed the law. So it changed not but like a month or two ago. So a quick summary for people is the way it used to be is it was just like you said, salary versus hourly. They changed that a few years ago. Hey, if you have somebody making at least this much in salary, you don't have to offer them overtime. But even if they are salary and they're under a threshold, then you are going to have to pay them time. And they just adjusted that rule. So think about what happens. It used to be about 35,000. I'm trying to think of the new number. My big thing about finances, I tell my people not to memorize every number, just know where to find it. But the number was around 35,353, and now they substantially raised that number. So let me break that down. So if you were salaried employee, even at 35,000, and you work 60 hours a week, you do not get overtime. Now they bumped that number to, I think it's like 52,000, significantly higher. And so anybody that is salaried and under 52,000 must be paid time and a half for their overtime. So there's ways to do that, right? You can have hiring agreements. What you can do is now you keep people at a certain threshold. And we found the balance to be with, like, 'cause again, if we're hiring some very fresh out of college, administrative, no experience levels, just flat honest, they're probably not going to be making $52,000 a year in salary. They got to work their way up to that, and then they can achieve even more. But for them to be the new kid on the block making 40 grand a year and expected to work overtime, and then I reward that in a bonus, well, that's a different incentive. Well, now I have to adjust my standards. So we've played the fringe benefit balance. We will offer more or less fringe benefits to dance around that salary position and saying, hey, would you rather the chance at a higher bonus, or would you rather just be salaried and I put you through the grind, right? And so there's different ways to offer that and navigate that. But yeah, that is one of the big issues. Again, you alluded to this, 2025, there's probably going to be some significant employment laws and tax law changes. So buckle your seatbelt and take everything I'm saying today with a grain of salt, because it may change in just a couple months.
Well, and taking that into consideration, how can companies create policies that protect both the business and its employees? Because obviously, a business is only as good as the employees that support it.
Yep, this is one thing that is probably the most friction-based question we get for internal related things. It's like, I want to take care of my people, I want to take care of my employees, but I want it to largely be incentivized, and I don't want it to just be entitled and automatic that you get these things, because then they'll stop working for you legitimately. So there's all sets of accountability things that need to be put in place. So the first thing you need to do is you have to have policies. I always coach people, there are 4 essential policies at a minimum that all companies in the United States must have. And that policy has to be very clear. So you're going to have to take your time, articulate it, probably get with an HR professional to help you look at this. The HR professional may or may not be legally bound and able to practice law as well, but they're going to know what's clean and fair, and they're going to be able to help you with compliance and policies and fill in those gaps for what you're missing is like, oh, you can't say that and write that into policy. Here's the labor law that prevents you from doing that or forces you to do something else. Of course, I think a lot of us know that, having drug policies, having anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policies, that's very cookie cutter. So that's one way you can protect yourself. But the other is to set up tiers, scales, level of achievements, and clear expectations that if you reach this level of core competencies, you will achieve this level, unlock these benefits, unlock this pay, instead of making everything just a mystery. And then you eliminate the bias. Well, you rewarded her for this, and you didn't reward me for that, and now you're a biased employer. What's wrong with me? And even though it may just be some hidden, unmeasured metric that she works a lot harder than you do, it's not in policy that there's a tier, there's a prevention, there's a job description, and there's something related to that reward that protects you both in being able to reward and being able to deny fairly.
And that's actually that, thank you. Because that is the most probably succinct way of being able to guide someone, especially in the brief period on television that we have. Um, but it makes me think of what other considerations should a business take or have when handling especially sensitive employment disputes. Uh, you know, I think we've all experienced that, especially lately. Of recent, there's, I would say, some sensitivities or some core issues that people have to be sensitive and aware about. So how does a business manager or a CEO or owner of a business handle those employment disputes of a sensitive nature?
So I'm going to quick tangent of to hire wisely, hire people in accordance to your business culture, right? Who's going to fit the personalities, the workflow, the communication styles with your people already in existence. If you have a highly warm, very talkative office, and then you hire a very cold person, there's probably going to be friction and ultimately get some type of dispute that comes in place, some perception of fairness. And the second one in prevention is to have those clear policies that I said. But you're asking more specifically, what do you do when this happens?
When
So you need to be very impartial. You need to be as objective as possible. And this is a huge where my law enforcement background comes in. So what we do is we actually dictate how we will investigate complaints and disputes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, of course, talk to the complainant party first, who is probably the supposed victim and likely victim, but we do not make assumptions that everything they say is true. Everything is trust but verify. So I trust what you're saying, but we need dates, documents, emails, messaging platforms, what caused you to truly develop this and get a chain of evidence going. And then we go talk to the other party as well without truly alarming or threatening punishment and stuff like that, and just say, hey, here's a situation we're looking into. I need your side of the story. And if you've been in court systems or law or any type of relationship disputes for very long, you very quickly realize that there's this side, that side, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so it's important that you find the truth in the middle or as close to the truth as you can get, because that may very much sway which way you take your approach. Then in your policies, you need to have a written system of a violation of this nature gets this response, a violation of this nature gets this response, and there's an escalating scale. There's also, you got to give yourself an out. In our policies, almost every policy says, but there can be an exemption based on the president's assessment or his or her designee can make an exception, right? But then you have to discipline yourself that these are true exemptions. If you keep exempting everybody, then that becomes the rule, right? And that's literally called a legal workplace culture. So we want to reference those policies, reference the tier of response, and have as complete a picture as possible, talking to all parties. Then you can bring in a third neutral party. You can have that critical conversation and explain the path to the corrective behavior, possible remedial actions, discipline, and or punishment, and then see where it goes from there to get that resolution processed. And then you got to monitor that there's no backbiting, gossip, retaliation, and things like that, because that's its own separate item that needs to be investigative. So if you get some of those alleged workplace discriminations types of things, you need to take them seriously, and you need to move quickly. That was something else that I forgot. You need to move quickly on them.
Thank you, Ryan. You really do. You bring everything to the table. I love having you on this show. So for those of our audience who would really must get in touch with Ryan Conn, and get his services, especially with CS Business Consulting, what would be the best way of getting a hold of you and your business?
The best way is definitely my website. It's www.csbizcon.com. So that's CSBIZCON.com. There's all of my services are listed there, all of the products, a lot of freebies and giveaways. And there's places where you can just sign up for consultation, just to have a conversation, or you can even buy services right off of the website. But that's basically the whole package. Of course, if you just want to call the phone number 270-442-6688, you just ask for CS Business Consulting or Ryan Conn, and we'll get back to you as quick as we can.
Thank you, Ryan. Once again, it's always such a privilege to have you on my show. And I want to thank you, the viewers, for tuning in to another episode of Legal Talk with Alina, and we will see you next week.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.